the main thing we want to talk about today is a little bit of history. And if you have been on the BDR website in the last day or two, you will find, and it's nice to see it, I guess, because we've hit 100 years for the folks at WBZ. And so right here, a little article that Donna Halper and I put together that you can click right there and go to WBZ. And that's not to take away from KDKA and their situation. That's sort of different. WBZ had the first, what they, the DOC, called commercial license, not meaning the same as the word commercial today. And so, but what I'd like to do is, it being Yom Kippur today, we were not able to have Donna here in person, and several others were not able to be with us. But Donna and I spoke on Tuesday.
Hi, Jamie.
Donna and I spoke on Tuesday, and this is not too long, but we'll start with this, and then we'll have a group discussion. I could just welcome Donna Halper to join us this afternoon. Donna is an historian, associate professor at Lesley University, author of 6 books and many articles talking about broadcast history on various directions. And so, Donna,
so they told me, hey, I sound pretty good, you know?
Hey.
And a former broadcaster.
And a former broadcaster. Well, that's
who still gets on the air every now and then. I still get to be talent.
Hey. So we'd like to spend a few minutes to talk about a series we're launching on the BDR about centenary stations, that is, stations that are 100 years old.
Indeed.
And the very first one, of course, well, KDKA and all its little stuff, but this month, September 2021, is the 100th anniversary of
WBZ.
Right in your backyard.
Indeed, in Boston. It wasn't always in Boston, though.
That's right.
Started off in Springfield.
Why was
for those who aren't from here, for those who are not from here, that wasn't that big a deal at first, okay? Because 100 years ago, there was very slow public transportation. There were not all like super highways, and individual cities were a big deal. And the fact that they had their individual radio station, they had their own theaters, they had their own activities and events. And at first, the fact that WBZ was out at the Westinghouse plant on Page Boulevard in Springfield was like, oh, that's nice, because lots of cities would soon have their own stations, either in a hotel or in a plant or, you know, various other places. But pretty soon there gets to be a problem. And you and I know what that problem is. All radio back then is live. And at first, you're only on a couple of hours at night if you're lucky, okay? So the fact that you have, like, you know, the local Sunday school teacher who comes on and sings, or the local baritone at the, you know, at the theater who comes on and sings, you're fine. But then you start expanding your broadcast day. And Springfield is a lovely city. It's got the Basketball Hall of Fame and a whole bunch of, what it doesn't have is Boston. What it doesn't have is like 19 theaters and a whole host of live talent coming in. I mean, Boston's a top 10 market. And as WBZ expands its broadcast day, it doesn't have enough live talent. And it starts sounding like it's stretched. There's another problem. The signal from Springfield doesn't get into all of Boston, which is 85 miles away. It doesn't sound that much. AM signals, boom, they go long distances. If you're a DX fan like I am, you remember listening to cities far, far away. Except there are holes in this. There are some signals that just, I'm sorry, you can't get them in certain places. And that was the problem for BZ. It had a good signal in some parts of Boston. In other parts of Boston, nope, not so much. And this leads to Westinghouse making the decision to finally open up a Boston studio in late February 1924.
And they had a different call sign for it.
Not at first. Not at first. At first, they make this decision that they're going to put both stations on the same wave, on the same frequency. Okay, they're just going to, like, for all intents and purposes, WBZ has a booster station in Boston. In fact, that's how it's referred to. The newspapers don't know what to do with it. Like, what is a booster station? I guess kind of like a translator. Okay, so they don't have that language yet, but they're like, all right, I put on, you know, whatever kilohertz it is, and I get WBZ. Well, listeners are confused. How come I'm getting WBZ in Boston, except sometimes they say WBZ Springfield? Which is it? Is it Boston? Is it Springfield? And then we have another problem. And Barry, you're an engineer, so you can explain this better than I can. Because of the fact that they're on the same wave, at times there's this, well, what the newspapers call a heterodyne hum, which the listeners call like a sawmill buzz. And at certain points in time, you can't hear the station.
You mean they had Sequam stereo on AM in 1921?
Who knew? Who knew? But the bottom line is, it ain't working out to have both of them on the same frequency. And finally, in 1925, mid-1925, August, the radio inspector, who is really tired of getting complaints from listeners about this incredibly annoying hum, finally just says, nuts to this, we're moving you guys. At that point, WBZ has a name for its Boston station, WBZA. Now, it had already sort of been migrating in that direction for a couple of months sooner, but now it's official. It's WBZA. And there it will sit in Boston, separate, on a separate wave, and the hum goes away. And all is right with the world, sort of. Except we still got a problem. As more hours of the day go on, you have more need for more artists. And the Springfield artists, they're just not of the caliber of the Boston artists. No offense to Springfield. There were some wonderful artists that came through Springfield. But most of them by that time, they're coming through Boston. And it becomes real apparent that WBZA, for all intents and purposes, it's a Boston station. And Westinghouse finally gives up the fight, says fine, and swaps the call letters. Early 1931, WBZA goes to Springfield, WBZ goes to Boston. And to this day, WBZ is one of the few, and certainly KDKA is another, but one of the few stations with the original call letters. God bless them. WBZ is, was, and always has been WBZ.
That's true. And it's amazing, unfortunately, I think, many others do, that with all the consolidation, an awful lot of young GMs gave away three-letter calls for no reason that anyone can really put their finger on.
Oh, that is my pet peeve in life. But for whatever reason, and God bless them for doing it, WBZ has always been WBZ. Now, they've been on a whole bunch of frequencies. I mean, for a long time, they were at 990 on the AM dial.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't finally move to their original location until 1941, when a
Right.
whole bunch of stations got moved. And
Yes, that was the
one of them.
general moving day in March 29, 1940.
Oh, yeah. Confused everyone. It's like, where did my station go? But BZ has been at 1030 on the AM band since then. Now, agreed, you can listen online. If I'm on the Morgan White show, which I sometimes am, we are taping this on a Tuesday, Monday, a Tuesday. It's hard to tell. I'm teaching a whole bunch of classes. We're Tuesday, aren't we? If
Yes,
it's
we are.
Tuesday, it must be I'm teaching a
Belgium.
class.
We're Belgium.
Indeed, that too. But this Saturday, I will be on the Morgan White show. Now, years ago, if I were on the Morgan White show and you were a broadcast band DXer, you would just be like, oh, maybe I'll get lucky and I'll be able to get WBZ. I mean, it gets into 38 states.
Now it
These
does.
days? Oh, yeah.
Now it does. Because just at that very same time that it moved to 1030, something else happened.
And you can tell us what that is.
Well, the company built a brand new facility in Hull, Massachusetts,
Yes, they did.
which is out there on Cape Cod, sort of by the water.
Kind of jutting out. They're not quite Cape Cod, a little before. A little
Okay,
bit before.
just before. And they installed a 2-tower directional, which then took their signal from being mostly over the ocean to mostly over the US.
Absolutely. Because we had another station in town, WMEX, which was the standing joke. They were at 1510. And the standing joke was that they were #1 in 18 to 24 trees and fish. Because at night, their night signal, right out into the ocean.
That was a
All
common
it's-
problem in those days, both coasts, because you would have Providence, Rhode Island, what was it, the Whale on 990.
Oh, yeah.
All its signal went over the ocean. And in California and Seattle, Washington, there are some that similarly had huge signals over a lot of water. Sometimes they'd hit Hawaii, but they wouldn't get very far inland.
Oh, indeed. Indeed. By the way, my apologies to your viewers over getting confused with what day it is. We just started the semester at the university where I teach, and I have spent like 5 consecutive hours in meetings. I don't know if I'm coming or going, seriously. And I got 2 more to go. So having fun doing this, it's a wonderful respite, and I really appreciate the opportunity. But if I seem a little bit frazzled, I mean, I keep Baby Yoda behind me just to remind me to just be calm. But some days I ain't calm. That having been said, yeah. So now if I'm on the Morgan White show this Saturday night, you can listen online. Now, it's interesting because there are still a lot of people that listen right on the old school AM band. God bless them. But there's also an awful lot of people that tune in online via the internet, by streaming. I mean, these were things that when BZ first went on the air, they were the stuff of science fiction. And yet today, we just take it for granted. Yep, there's Baby Yoda.
Yeah, just for you.
Thank you.
And I know you're not coming or going, you're right here. And that's what we really appreciate, because you over the years have written a number of very nice articles for me at Radio Guide and now the BDR.
I love the BDR. The BDR is wonderful. I always enjoy writing for you. Had a
Thank
lot of fun refuting, again, the KDKA myth about like first station in the world, in the universe. Again, I'm not trying to take anything away from anyone, okay? There were a lot of books written way back when that claimed that X was the first or Y was the first or Z or, you know, and I don't even want to have that battle. For us right now, what we're doing, we just want to honor stations that have been around for at least 100 years and are still with us and still making a difference. And KDKA, tip of the cap to you, okay? Seriously. And 8MK, WWJ. When people say to me, yeah, but they were an amateur station at first. I just wrote an article for the Antique Wireless Review about that very subject. It was a distinction without a difference because amateurs filled in for commercial broadcasters filled in for amateurs. There was no state of the art in 1920. Everybody just kind of did everything until someone told them not to. And until the Department of Commerce really got tough with the amateurs in December of 1921, and there was much wailing and gnashing of teeth about that, believe me, because an awful lot of the amateurs were having fun filling in for the commercial broadcasters. They enjoyed playing the hits, okay? And suddenly they were told, nope, no hits for you. And that kind of changed everything. So yeah, whether 8MK was amateur calls, and tip of the hat to Clyde Darr, D-A-R-R, who is the amateur who helped put 8MK on the air, and a forgotten amateur, I must say.
And
But
8ZZ,
yeah, absolutely. But
which
that's
became
exactly my
KDKA.
point. Go.
8ZZ became KDKA, and in fact, that so-called famous first night of broadcasting election returns was not KDKA, it was 8ZZ.
Thank you. And that's exactly my point. If you were here, I'd hug you. That's because that's it. There you go. Virtual hugs for everyone. But that's exactly my point. So many of the early stations, that's what my article is about. So many of the early stations went on the air under amateur calls because they could.
Sure.
And once things got a little bit more stable and there was more of a state of the art, then fine, KDKA. By the time WBZ came along, and they really did get a commercial license before KDKA, because there was no such thing as the kind of commercial broadcasting license that you and I know today. Back then, if you were a business, you could get a commercial license. Thank you. But a commercial broadcasting, BZ got the first one, sorry. And there they were.
Okay.
So I think that it's really nice.
Well, we want to thank
KDKA has survived, BZ has survived, WWJ has survived, and we are going to be talking throughout the next few months. We're going to be talking about some of those pioneering stations that have been around for 100 years, and I'm looking forward to it, Barry. So thank you for having me on as part of it.
Well, thank you. And we'll just sort of invite everybody to take a look at the BDR. If you go to the menu up here under articles, right here, and you drop the menu down, it'll show you history, radio history at the bottom. Look in there, you'll find marvelous articles that Donna's written. I've written one or two. We're going to be freshening a few of them up as the stations hit 100, but you will find it interesting, and we invite you to share some tidbits about the stations that perhaps even we didn't know yet. So
absolutely. And we could say an awful lot more about BZ, but for obvious reasons, we don't want to get into like a whole WBZ presentation. I'll just say it's a privilege to know that this one station has lasted not only 100 years, but has continued to be live and local. So
and
many
well-rated.
stations, yeah, still around. So many stations today. They're syndicated, they're this, they're that, they're automated. Nothing but live humans on that station. I mean, yes, of course, at certain day parts, they do have some syndicated programming on the weekends. But if I tune in to WBZ right now, there's a live human on the air. And the correspondents out covering the news, all live. I know this for a true fact. When I'm on with Morgan White, he's live. I'm live. It is a privilege to find stations that still believe live and local works, because it does.
Well, that's what we see with the WBZ being third in the market as an AM station, which is unusual today. So.
Absolutely. So
Oh.
I got to go, Barry, but thank you so much for having me on. I hope that your viewers enjoyed our little talk. We will come on and say a lot more, I promise you. But
Thank
for
you so
now,
much.
much love, and thank you for loving radio history as much as the two of us do.
We'll see you soon, Donna.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that. I think that Donna is just a tremendous person to talk to, and she's done a lot of work. And over the years, since I first got to meet her, we have corresponded voluminously. She's one of these people that stays up all night and types 40 messages in 5 minutes. And she's been through the Library of Congress records. She's been through a lot of newspaper articles. We've shared the RSBs and the microfiches, and a lot of things have turned up. We found the first women who owned radio stations, the first Blacks. We found other pieces of history, and we'll be talking about that as we go along. Before we pass away from WBZ, maybe I could ask Richard, because he used to work there before he floated through Tucson on his way to LA in fame. And that Westinghouse 50G transmitter. Richard, talk to us about that if you would.
Okay. Let's see, I'm unmuted.
Oh.
Yes, that was quite a transmitter. I can remember when I got my orientation on that transmitter when I was doing summer relief at WBC. The transmitter engineer was a very typical transmitter engineer in some ways, but atypical in others. Name was Fred Osgood. And I can remember one of the most useful pieces of information that he gave me about that, because having primarily worked in college radio before then, 50 kilowatt transmitters were a little bit new to me. There it is. Okay. And as I said in comments during Donna's presentation, I sometimes joke that the HG50 transmitter, or 50 HG transmitter, was named, had the 50 in it, not so much for the kilowatts, but the number of meters you had to read. Now, the meters along the top row are only some of the meters in that transmitter. There were meters that really went right down to the voltage going to the crystal. And every morning at the end of the night shift, you had to drive down from Boston to Hull. And part of the inspection was to fill out a sheet that required you to read every meter in that transmitter, and then climb down into the caissons under the two towers to read the base current meters and make sure they were still happy. The caissons were interesting because many years before RFR or anything else like that, the only way you could safely climb down those ladders is to rapidly grab hold of the rungs and climb down, and not let go of the rungs until you were clear at the bottom and could get both hands off at once. Otherwise, you get an RF burn. And I got several of them before I caught on to the technique. But the bit of information that Fred gave me had to do with he asked me the questions, very simple question. What do you do when you get a call to go to the transmitter? Because it's off the air at Hull. I gave him a whole list of things that I learned through him and through experience that I should check. He said, no. First thing you do when you walk in the door is you go into the bathroom and close the door, sit down in the porcelain convenience, although he didn't use that word, and clear your mind. And he didn't use that phrase. And that bit of information has stood me in good stead over the years when I've had to go to transmitter sites that have been off the air. Because it has to go to thought process and troubleshooting and other things that we could have another session about. But the 50 spent a useful service lifetime there. And I had the pleasure and honor to be part of a two-man crew with a fellow by the name of Norm Graham, who Barry probably remembers.
Yep.
We actually installed the Continental 317C that came on as the main transmitter then. And the HG was installed in the good old days when the industry was still using lead-coated cables. And so far, I haven't suffered too many effects, although brain cell damage is hard to judge in engineers. But we did use gloves, but I've touched a lot of old lead cable in my lifetime and managed so far to have lived to tell about it. And I remember the day that we decided that we were going to do some testing on the Continental. Now, the chief engineer at that time ordered supplies for us, and he made a very interesting choice. Instead of getting, well, basically he ordered 5,000 feet of red number 12 wire. And Norm and I used to joke when we were troubleshooting, well, the trouble must be in the red wire. And I can remember when the old Schaefer remote control system that linked it to the TV transmitter site in Natick, Massachusetts, because radio didn't control its own transmitter from the studio at that time. We had to cut over to the new system and turn off the Schaefer. Well, we did so, and when the smoke cleared in the room afterwards, we decided we weren't going to go home that day. We were going to have to work through the night and the day and fix things and find out what was wrong. But the Schaefer pretty much was toast, and we were committed to go to the new Mosley remote control system. Does anybody have any questions about that period of time, or have you heard me talk enough?
Well, Richard, the 317 is what I didn't have a picture of. I had a shot of the MW50 and of the DX50, and I know there's a 3DX50 in there now, but I didn't know there's a Continental in the middle.
Yeah, well, that came in and replaced that. We also, of course, I got in there in the 60s when we still had the 5 kilowatt gates at the studio that was set up for Conrad. And I actually did a Monday morning test on that one morning and had to shut it off to prevent the fire from spreading.
Wow.
Yeah, we still, that was back in the days, some of you won't remember this, some of you will. Back in the days when we went off the air Monday nights for maintenance, and I used to be on the maintenance crew when I went permanent with WBZ for a couple of years. And we used to go down and basically do an audio proof, a mini audio proof on the whole system, and tones and everything. Yeah. Is
this the place you were talking about with the ladder?
No. I'm trying. That may be. No, it was not built out like that, and it wasn't fenced at the time. It's still the same base. I don't know if they still kept the caissons or not, because obviously there were different. You could maybe when they rebuilt it, and one of the times after I left, they managed to not have to locate the base current meters in the base. Or actually, it was pretty much the sub basement, because actually on flood tides, the caissons were that was a marsh and it was flooded. We did have to walk out the catwalk, and and we were working alone, so you always had to call a studio to let them know when you're going to do the base current inspections in case you didn't come back up. And I remember one winter, I was on the ladder coming down into one, and there was ice on the ladder, and I slid all the way down to the bottom and right on my tailbone, and I didn't know if I was going to be able to climb up the ladder.
Ooh.
Obviously, I did. But it would have probably been 2 hours before anybody would have realized I wasn't back and have done something about it, or more.
And they
Yeah,
melted the building.
That's the same. That's the building. The fence didn't exist at the time that way, but it was built as a kind of a Cape Cod house. That was the style that several of the Westinghouse transmitter buildings were built in to fit into neighborhoods, because back in those days, they were built in neighborhoods.
Yeah, they sure were.
You can see the towers in the background through the fog. It was coastal. So I think I mentioned in a comment, Hull is just south of Boston Harbor. And actually, when I got into, I can remember taking my boat up from further south of Boston up into Boston Harbor and in and around, and you could actually get in and pretty close to the transmitter site at that time. That was before, but that was before I was working at the site. But I certainly knew it pretty well, and its relationship to Boston Harbor.
I appreciate those memories. It certainly, you transitioned from the big heavy metal transmitters into the middle the age, and now of course we have things like the solid state, and goodness, the transmitter is what, 1/10 the size of what they were back in the 40s and 50s.
In some cases, a lot smaller than that. If you look at something like the Nautel VS 2.5s and things like that, or whatever. But even the new BEs, I installed a 5 kilowatt BE recently, and basically it's basically 5 1 kilowatt transmitters in a combiner, and it'll fit in a half rack.
We have a question here for you, if you remember this. It says, how closely spaced are the towers and how tall were they?
They were actually, I don't remember the actual distance, but the catwalk, trying to visualize the catwalk, I'm guessing they were probably 150, 200 feet apart. You know, they were on 1030, so you can figure from that what the spacing might have been. I hadn't thought about that distance in a while, and I was trying to visualize walking from one to the other, which I did a number of times. But I've actually had something to do with more than one 3-letter call station. It's WBZ, KDB in Santa Barbara, KGB in San Diego, where I was the chief engineer for 3 years. And let's see, what else? Well, it's 3 more than some people have worked at.
Well, here you are, the height, 152 meters.
300 feet, give or take. Yeah.
Well,
I'll tell you what, go on Google Earth, you can use a measure and figure it out. Maybe I'll do that.
well, and you had 93 degree spacing.
Yeah, okay, yeah, all right, yeah.
So
Okay.
75 meters is 200 feet.
Yeah, well, I had said 150. I guess I walked fast.
Yeah, 450. All right. Frank's got 256 feet here.
Yeah, right. Okay. Yeah, that sounds about right.
So, all right.
So it was for a catwalk that was, built in a marsh, it actually was pretty sturdy, well done. And we didn't see any cats, mostly seagulls out there.
Very good. Well, as Donna had pointed out, we're going to look at some more of these early radio stations.
Can I, Barry, one more thing about Donna.
Sure.
She was the first woman DJ at the Northeastern University radio station when I was the chief engineer for that station in Boston. We made up the call letters because it was carrier current at first, WNEU. And Donna was an impressive person back then. And the then manager and I and several other people were honored to have worked with her in those days and met her. And we kept in contact a little bit over the years. We actually had a WNEU reunion at one point in Maine one year, a lot of years ago, actually. But and Donna came to that, and several other people who are no longer with us. Anyway, I'll mute myself and listen.
Well, again, thank you for your memories of WBZ, and I hope that fleshes out the story a little bit for those of you that jump on and read the article that Don and I put together. And now we could talk about any of the pioneer radio stations. I see someone mentioned WRR in Dallas. That was one of the first. In fact, that was, oh goodness, March of 22. So it was probably the 70th radio station on the air. Kfbk was another early one, especially noted for its antenna system. If any of you have ever been out there to see that. And there are quite a few that go back that far. Most of them don't have the same call sign as Donna said, but there are some that are exactly what they were in the early days. WR is one from Newark, New Jersey, that came on in February of 22. So we'll be commenting on some of these folks as we go along. And anybody have a memory that they'd like to kick in here? If you do, just press your space bar or use alternate A to unmute. And I was probably right at that juncture as we were moving from the large transmitters into the medium-sized ones, and as I was getting into the tech side more than I had started out on the air, and I was very fortunate that I watched the transition from tubes to transistors, and boy, that was fun. David, I saw you pop up.
I remember driving near David's old house in Dallas one time, and I saw these towers out in a park. So I went up and opened the front door, and the place was full of cops. And I said, "What the hell is this?" It's Dallas City Police. He said, "Oh, this is WRR. We have to take transmitter readings when we're not on duty."
Yeah, I went to that site with David Holtzman. That was a very unique and pretty transmitter site, Ken.
We have a viewer from Santiago Peak in Southern California, and he's wiring up a new rack while he's listening to us. That's a note that we just got in. Hey, good to see you, Marcus. I think what I found interesting as I got the opportunity to get around the country into a number of locations is to see the stations that were built in the 30s and 40s that, well, their buildings are still there or were still there, and they're like cathedrals of radio, if you will. They were on several. KFI was probably a really good example. Hi, Marcus. KFI had a transmitter. Was it upstairs? Boy, it's been too long now. But they had the generator, they had the transmitter, they had all sorts of stuff going on there. And, it was amazing to see. Or WBT in Charlotte, or KRLD in Dallas. Just off the top of my head, some of the places I've been privileged to see on the AM side, they were really built differently than they're built today.
And at KRLD, just a very few years made a real big difference in, well, how big the building would be. KRLD's current building was built about 48 or 49. They'd moved from an area west of there, near Love Field, where Love Field is today. And you go in the building, yeah, it's big and yeah, it's cathedral-like, but it's compact compared to some of these true palaces. You go through it and yeah, there's enough room in it that they store all kinds of junk in it. But you look at it saying, this was not built for wall of transmitters. They had one, but they very quickly went into the 317s. I don't think they ever had an MW50. They had a Westinghouse, and they had a Continental that sat uninstalled for 10 or 15 years. I think they bought it in the early 70s. I don't think it got on the air till the 80s. And not very many years ago, when they got their DX50, they felt they were one transmitter over, so they opened the double doors upstairs and just shoved the 317 out. Just gravity took over. But I'm trying to think. WBAP and WFAA's old space, the site that was on the DFW airport grounds, was really impressive. The one they just vacated at North Lake was still pretty nice for an early 70s build.
That's the BAP, the KRLD site in 2006.
The what?
KRLD,
Ah.
2006. There's the Continental. There's the DX50.
And where does that door go? Because I was thinking this space was upstairs.
It is, I believe, and I think that's out back. Let me see what I can show you all here. Yeah, you go upstairs to get into it. A lot of it was empty from the old days.
Yeah, Eric referred to the stuff stored there, and they used to have a lot of office furniture kind of things. He said it's composting in an accounting sense.
That was their ISO coupler.
Yep. I found that very interesting.
They had one just like it at WBAP, but it was two 10-foot STL dishes about a foot apart.
They were very close, and they had a blower to keep the gnats out of it.
Yep. They also had a picnic ground outside the KRLD building where they had all their staff get-togethers at. They thought if they got drunk out here, they could run right up there and correct whatever they did.
Yeah, that was a nice place to visit.
Yeah, I think at least.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm from Press Communications, and I have an online account, but it says, I'm trying to look up a connector. It said you are not authorized to purchase, learn more, or I can't.
George, are you
What,
talking?
George?
I'm sorry, say it again.
George, are you talking to us? I think not. All right, onward.
Are we just talking old transmitters that we've been to, AM?
None
It South,
We're talking
South
Pioneer stations mostly,
Pioneer stations.
but it's wide open.
Yeah, as a native Houstonian, Houston wasn't really a thing till the 40s, so there isn't much AM there. KTRH 740 had an old RCA transmitter in Beaumont. It's since moved north of town. But if you went to San Antonio, as I did in the early 70s, you got to see KKYX 680 AM and their 100,000 watt Westinghouse installation with a Fairbanks Morse standby generator to power that thing. That was always a lot of fun. To fire that thing up, which we were able to do up until the mid 70s. There was also an ampliphase at KKYX 680. Of course, WAI and San Antonio is an old AM town with lots of old AM, and they're still on the air with the same call letters today. But I doubt if much is left of the 100 kilowatt Westinghouse. In that very brief period of time where stations could have 100 kilowatts is why they put that in.
I never made it to the KFWB site, Richard. I was at KFI or KNX, KRLA.
I went there a
El
couple
Sereno.
thousand times. I built the new transmitter building in 1980 for it. So that's another long story, but that's an East LA site, and what some people think is not a very nice community. I always had good luck. We had a guy that lived across the street from us that was our watchman.
Now, KFWB was one of those that was pointed out over the ocean, but it bought the station up in Santa Barbara in order to let the pattern out.
Yeah, it did. And we tried to get some kind of diplomatic relations established with, it became Clear Channel to try to make some adjustments and things with that. And the irony of that is I'm now actually in charge of the 990 station engineering for some aspects now. But it was actually my first contact with people like Al Kenyon in that world. And Al and I certainly spent a lot of time together on EAS issues, and we're still friends to this day, now that he has a female life. But at that point, the diplomatic relations between Clear Channel and Westinghouse were not friendly enough to do any negotiating.
Another thing that comes to mind is, as we talk about you building a new building in 1980, same thing happened at 710, the former KMPC, much smaller building, because we could walk into the transmitter before, inside the transmitter. But the thing that occurs to me too is that over the years, consolidation has been one thing that has crippled a lot of the stations because they've lost their sites. KCBQ in San Diego comes to mind, KHJ in LA. If Marvin was here, he would talk about the 3 or 4 stations on the Santa Monica towers.
There's another little bit of history for KFWB I might mention really quickly. I happen to know why KFWB became the PEP station for Southern California. because the original consulting firm located.
You just muted yourself.
Yeah, okay. Now should leave the cursor there. Okay. Anyway, the original PEP stations were set up by a consulting company that, with the goal of trying to cover with the fewest number of stations, AM stations, 90% of the population of the continental United States. And their original choice was actually KLAC. However, when they went down and looked and did the site survey, KLAC was located in the old building, and it was an unreinforced brick building. And they saw this other building, and they wondered what station was in there, and the rest, as they say, is history. Now it's KFI and not KFWB, and that's history too.
Yes. And even thinking about WOWO in Fort Wayne, which used to have a huge signal. And then, of course, the company was bought so that they could pull it in from New York. And now WOWO has a very relatively small signal for a 50 kilowatt. And there've been a lot of diplexing and triplexing going on that has changed the nature of AM. As mentioned, WBZ continues to be number 3 in the market, which is unusual. But in so many markets, it's all FMers one after another.
So Barry, a radio station that turns 100 next year is in a small market in Southern Oregon, KMED, which started life as KFAY in 1922 with 5 watts at 1200.
KFAY, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yep. Now KMED. And for those of you who have a remembrance of Scala antennas, Ellis Feinstein, who was the president of Scala for many years, was the chief engineer at KMED for a long, long time.
Oregon had a lot of special history. I remember Mike, San Jose State, not San Jose, Southern Oregon State there. He wrote a book about the Oregon's broadcasters, including the one there. Was it Medford, or I don't want to say unless I'm sure, but he used the sewers. He strung the wire through the sewers to do remotes. Which sounds like a weird story, but it's true. Cheaper than going through the phone company.
No kidding.
I've got a remote story for you. Back at the student station, University of Missouri, we just used to load up on the local payphone circuit, make a call or to it because that was free, and put an out of order sign on it. And it was great for a monaural remote. It didn't sound bad. Plus, as a bonus, when you're over with it, you put it back in service as a payphone and push return, and you get a couple bucks of quarters out. Yeah, I grew up in St. Louis. WIL will be 100 years old next year in the spring. It's got quite a sordid history, bounced all over the place, that no longer exists as an AM. I think it was 1430, but it has a lot of early history with the nation networks and stuff, and it was recently shut down by the FCC because of a felon was in control of it, and then it went up for auction here within the past year, and nobody bid on it. So that's a glorious crash and burn. My big namesake is I was an IBW Extra 4 extra labor union card member, was Camo X. which I think won't be 100 till 19, or came on board in 1925. So it doesn't make the Century Club yet, but there's certainly a lot of history there, and still on the air. And when I was at Mosley, I remember selling new STLs, PCL 101s. So this goes back 30 years, and it went from One Memorial Plaza, which is right by the arch, up to Granite City, Illinois, and the signal went right through the arch, and that was pretty neat for a St. Louis native.
Hey, Brian, I'm gonna pop the balloon just a little bit. Kfbk was deleted December 24 due to the failure to file for renewal in September 24.
Yep.
KMED came on by William Virgin. It was the same man. Kfbk was his, the WJ Virgin Milling Company from Central Point, as was KMED. That was 1926, December 26. So it took him about 2 years to get back up and running.
Well, yeah, and KFAY kind of bounced around for a while and didn't really bother to ever get a license from the Federal Radio Commission, figuring that way out there in Southwest Oregon that the FRC would never find them.
Well,
And
as you said there, 1922 at 5 watts, and
yeah,
jumped all over the dial, 1059, and eventually just they were one of the ones that died.
yeah. I think they landed at 1440 in the 1941.
Yeah, let's see, 1440 is where KMED landed.
Yeah.
The
And
last,
that was the first transmitter I ever saw when I was about 4 years old. Was the KMED RCA transmitter, and it was so cool because it glowed.
that was a 5 something.
That was a BTA 5, yeah.
Yeah, they jumped to 5 kilowatts in 49, but I don't know exactly which 5. That'd be a 5E maybe, or 5F.
You know, I was like 4 years old. Wasn't keeping track on. Wasn't keeping track on that, man.
Well, it's always interesting to get some of the pictures of these stations in those days. They were a little harder to get now than they used to be, because
Yeah.
these stations, especially under consolidation, literally bulldozed their papers into the dumpsters.
Yeah.
So I've got a fairly extensive bunch of notes that Zen Scott was very kind to help me put together, from the transcripts from the microfiches, and I can generally, between the microfiches and some of the newspaper articles that we had, I can generally trace it. And as you said, KMED jumped around considerably.
Yeah.
Then a couple of different networks, one that didn't last very long, and then they became part of the NBC network. And they even went in and out of Clear Channel.
Mm-hmm.
I think they were they not one of the ones Clear Channel had to divest at some point, something like that.
Boy, I don't know that Clear Channel ever owned them. I'm not sure.
It was a J-Corps in 1998.
Okay.
You know what's really a pain in the butt when you're doing research is the FCC, in their infinite wisdom, said all the transfer, if you go in, you'll look for former applications, and they'll have the dates, but they'll have the current licensee on every one of them, and they won't really show you. You have to go back through the Broadcasting Yearbook and other sources. Fortunately, we have more of those sources today than we used to have, thanks to some of the work Donna has done, some of the work that yours truly was involved in. some of the material Mr. Gleason did on his site. And we find these things. We find some interesting things about the different stations that we didn't know why they were planted where they were. And of course, as you may remember, the Federal Radio Commission tried to move the big ones around so that all the states had a fair number of stations, and that didn't work very well. It's one of the reasons the FCC was created, because the FRC could tell people to do things, but had no power to make them do it. And I guess one of the New York stations, was it W 1050, the one that was WHN store? They were very publicly opposed to working with the FRC.
It was interesting to see how the FRC tried to implement their mandate, weak as it was. When it's hard to regulate something you haven't invented yet, or you're sort of in the pre-beta stages of something, and yeah, we don't even know what it's going to be when it's finished. But the FRC did at one point, yeah, it was the 5 regions of the country and just vertical slices across the country. And they were trying to do equitable distribution by number of watts. I saw that in a card for what is KFYO in Lubbock today, has been since about 1932.